The morning sun painted the streets of Hillridge in soft, golden light. It was the kind of small town where everyone knew everyone, where the pace of life moved like honey, slow and sweet. The mountains in the distance stood like silent guardians, their peaks touching the clear blue sky. This was a place where time seemed to move differently, where decades could pass, and yet everything remained beautifully, comfortingly the same. Lisa Berman pushed open the back door of Green Valley Market at exactly 6:30 in the morning, just as she had done every weekday for the past 22 years. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore her usual outfit: comfortable jeans, a plain green apron with the market's logo, and worn sneakers that had seen better days. At 67, she moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of someone who understood the value of routine and the comfort it provided. "Morning, Lisa," called out Tom Henderson, the store manager, from his small office near the entrance. Tom was a large man in his 50s, with a friendly face and a perpetual smile. He had been running Green Valley Market for 15 years, and Lisa had been there for 7 years before he even arrived. "Good morning, Tom," Lisa replied with a warm smile. Her voice was gentle but clear, the kind of voice that made people feel at ease. "Looks like it's going to be another beautiful day." "That it does," Tom agreed, stepping out of his office with a clipboard in hand. "The produce delivery should be here in about 30 minutes. I saw the order list yesterday. Lots of fresh vegetables coming in. You'll have your hands full today." Lisa nodded. "I'll be ready. Is there anything special you need me to focus on?" "Just the usual," Tom said. "Make sure the displays look perfect. You know how particular Mrs. Patterson gets about her tomatoes." One of their regular customers, a woman in her 70s who inspected every tomato as if she were examining precious gems. "I'll make sure they're arranged beautifully for her." Tom patted her shoulder affectionately. "You always do, Lisa. I don't know what we'd do without you. You're the best produce specialist we've ever had." Lisa felt a warm glow at the compliment, though she was too modest to show it. She simply smiled and headed toward the produce section of the store. This was her domain, her quiet kingdom. The vegetable and fruit displays stretched along the entire east wall of the market, bathed in soft lighting that made everything look fresh and appealing. She began her morning routine with practiced ease. First, she removed any vegetables or fruits that looked less than perfect from yesterday's display. Then she cleaned the shelves and misting systems that kept everything fresh. By the time the delivery truck arrived, she was ready. The delivery driver was Miguel, a cheerful man in his 30s who had been making deliveries to Green Valley Market for almost as long as Lisa had worked there. "Morning, Miss Lisa," he called out as he wheeled in the first cart stacked with crates of vegetables. "I've got some beautiful produce for you today. The lettuces are especially nice." "Thank you, Miguel," Lisa said, already examining the first crate of romaine lettuce. Her experienced eyes scanned each head, checking for freshness, color, and quality. "These look wonderful." For the next hour, Lisa worked steadily, sorting through the delivery. She had a natural talent for this work, an ability to see which vegetables would last longest, which ones needed to be displayed prominently to sell quickly, and how to arrange everything so it looked like an abundant harvest. Her hands moved with efficiency as she trimmed stems, arranged carrots in neat rows, and stacked bell peppers in colorful pyramids. "You make it look like art," said a voice behind her. Lisa turned to see Sarah Chen, one of the young cashiers who worked the morning shift. Sarah was 23, a college student working part-time to help pay for her education. She had a kind face and an eager personality that reminded Lisa of someone she once knew, though the memory was distant and blurred by time. "Thank you, Sarah," Lisa said with genuine warmth. "I just try to make everything look inviting. People eat with their eyes first, you know." "My grandmother used to say the same thing," Sarah replied, helping Lisa arrange some bunches of fresh herbs. She was a chef in San Francisco. You kind of remind me of her, actually. She had this same calm, steady way of doing things. Lisa felt a small pang in her chest, a familiar sensation that came whenever anyone compared her to someone from a different life. Your grandmother sounds like a wonderful woman. She was, Sarah said with a sad smile. She passed away 3 years ago, but I think about her every day. Lisa reached out and gently squeezed Sarah's hand. The people we love never really leave us. They stay in our hearts and in the things they taught us. Sarah's eyes grew a bit misty. That's a beautiful way to think about it. Thank you, Miss Lisa. As Sarah returned to her cash register, Lisa continued her work. This was what her life had become: quiet moments of connection, simple tasks performed with care, a peaceful existence in a small town where everyone knew her as just Lisa, the friendly woman who worked in produce at Green Valley Market. But there had been another life, a life before Hillridge, a life that sometimes haunted her dreams and made her wake up in the middle of the night with her heart pounding and her hands shaking. A life she had left behind 22 years ago and had never spoken about to anyone in this town. By mid-morning, the market was bustling with customers. Hillridge had a population of about 3,000 people, and it seemed like half of them shopped at Green Valley Market on any given day. Lisa knew most of them by name. There was Mr. Johnson, who always bought exactly 3 apples every Tuesday. There was young mother Rebecca Martin with her twin daughters, who loved to look at the colorful bell peppers. There was elderly Mr. Thompson, who asked Lisa's advice about which vegetables were best for his specific dietary needs. "Lisa, dear," called out Mrs. Patterson, approaching the tomato display with her usual critical eye. "I need tomatoes for a special sauce I'm making. They need to be perfect." "Let me help you," Lisa said, moving to the display. She had already anticipated Mrs. Patterson's visit and had set aside some particularly beautiful heirloom tomatoes. "I think these will be exactly what you need. They're firm but ripe, with just the right amount of acidity for sauce." Mrs. Patterson examined each tomato with the concentration of a surgeon. After several minutes of careful inspection, she nodded approvingly. "You're absolutely right, Lisa. These are perfect. You have such a good eye for produce." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I hope your sauce turns out wonderfully." As the elderly woman walked away with her carefully selected tomatoes, Tom appeared at Lisa's side. "You have a gift for this," he said. "Most people wouldn't care half as much about a tomato as you do." Lisa smiled, but her eyes held a distant look. "Every detail matters," she said quietly. "You never know when getting something exactly right might be important." Tom looked at her curiously. There was something in her tone, something that suggested a deeper meaning, but he knew better than to pry. Lisa was wonderful at her job and well liked by everyone, but she was also intensely private about her past. In 22 years, she had never mentioned family, never talked about where she came from or what she did before arriving in Hillridge. People had learned to respect her privacy, even as they welcomed her into their community. The day continued with its steady rhythm. Lisa took her lunch break in the small employee room behind the store, eating a simple sandwich she had packed that morning. She read a few pages of a novel she had been working through for the past week, something light and uncomplicated. Then she returned to the produce section, refreshing displays and helping customers until the late afternoon. As the day wound down, Lisa began her closing routine. She misted the vegetables one final time, removed any items that wouldn't last until morning, and carefully arranged everything for tomorrow's opening. She took pride in leaving the produce section perfect at the end of each day. "Have a good evening, Lisa," Tom called as she hung up her apron and prepared to leave. "You too, Tom. See you tomorrow." Lisa walked out of Green Valley Market into the golden light of late afternoon. Her small Honda sedan was parked in the employee lot behind the building. It was an old car, at least 15 years old, but she maintained it carefully, and it ran perfectly. She didn't need anything fancy or new. The car got her where she needed to go, and that was enough. The drive to her home took less than 10 minutes. Hillridge was small enough that nothing was ever very far away. Lisa lived on Maple Street, in a small two-bedroom house painted pale yellow with white trim. It had a small front porch with 2 rocking chairs and a garden that she tended carefully. The house was modest but comfortable, exactly right for one person living alone. As she pulled into her driveway, her neighbor, Mrs. Ellen Foster, waved from her own front porch. Ellen was in her early 70s, a widow who had lived in Hillridge her entire life. She and Lisa had become friendly over the years, though their relationship, like all of Lisa's relationships, maintained a certain boundary. "Good evening, Lisa," Ellen called out. "How was your day?" "It was good, thank you," Lisa replied, walking over to the fence that separated their properties. "How are you feeling? I know your arthritis was bothering you last week." "Much better, dear. The medication the doctor prescribed is helping. You're so kind to remember." "Of course. If you need anything from the market, just let me know. I can always bring things by." "You're such a treasure," Ellen said warmly. "Say, there's a potluck at the community center this Saturday. Will you come? I'm making my famous potato salad." Lisa hesitated. She often attended community events. It was expected in a small town, and she didn't want to seem unfriendly. But large gatherings still made her slightly uncomfortable, even after all these years. "I'll try," she said finally. "I might bring some fresh vegetable platters from the market." "That would be wonderful. Everyone loves your vegetable platters. You have such a talent for making them look beautiful." After a few more minutes of pleasant conversation, Lisa excused herself and went inside her house. The interior was neat and simple, decorated in soft, calming colors. The living room had comfortable furniture, a small television, and built-in bookshelves filled with novels and gardening books. The walls held a few landscape paintings she had picked up at local craft fairs, but there were no photographs, no pictures of family or friends, no visual history of a life before this one. Lisa changed out of her work clothes into comfortable sweatpants and a soft sweater. She made herself a simple dinner: grilled chicken breast, steamed broccoli, and brown rice. She ate at her small kitchen table, looking out the window at her backyard garden where tomatoes, herbs, and flowers grew in neat rows. After dinner, she washed her dishes and settled into her favorite chair in the living room with her book. This was her evening routine, simple and peaceful. Sometimes she watched a little television. She liked cooking shows and nature documentaries. Sometimes she worked in her garden if it was still light enough. But mostly she read, losing herself in other people's stories so she didn't have to think too much about her own. Around 9 o'clock, she prepared for bed. She brushed her teeth, washed her face, and changed into her nightgown. Before lying down, she stood at her bedroom window and looked out at the night sky. The stars were brilliant here, away from city lights. She could see thousands of them, tiny points of light scattered across the darkness. For a moment, a memory flickered through her mind. The view from above, the earth spreading out below, the sensation of movement and power and purpose. She closed her eyes and pushed the memory away, as she had done countless times before. "That was another life," she whispered to herself. "That person doesn't exist anymore." She climbed into bed and turned off the light. Sleep came slowly, as it often did. But eventually, she drifted off, her breathing steady and calm. Another day in her quiet life complete. Lisa woke at 5:30 the next morning, as she always did. Her internal clock was reliable, honed by decades of discipline. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, before pushing herself up and starting her morning routine. Shower, dress, simple breakfast of oatmeal and fruit, pack her lunch. By 6:15, she was in her car, driving through the empty streets of Hillridge toward Green Valley Market. The town was beautiful in the early morning. The mountains in the distance were bathed in soft pink light as the sun began its daily climb. A thin mist hung in the air, giving everything a dreamlike quality. Lisa had driven this route thousands of times, knew every turn and stop sign, every house and tree along the way. It was familiar and comforting, a ritual that helped her feel grounded and safe. As she unlocked the back door of the market, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a text message from Sarah, the young cashier. "Good morning, Miss Lisa. Running a few minutes late today. Sorry. See you soon." Lisa smiled and typed back a quick reply. "No problem. Drive safely." She appreciated Sarah's conscientiousness. The young woman reminded her of herself at that age. Eager, hardworking, always trying to do everything right. Though the comparison made her chest tighten with an old, familiar ache, she pushed the feeling away and focused on her work. The morning passed much like the previous day, with the comfortable rhythm of familiar tasks. Tom arrived, cheerful as always. The other employees trickled in. Brian, the assistant manager, Marcus, who handled the meat and deli section, Diane, who managed the bakery. Each of them greeted Lisa warmly. She had become something of a fixture at Green Valley Market, a reliable presence that everyone appreciated. Around mid-morning, as Lisa was arranging a new shipment of fresh strawberries, she heard raised voices near the front of the store. She looked up to see Tom speaking with a man she didn't recognize. The man looked agitated, waving his arms as he spoke. Tom's usually friendly face was concerned and apologetic. Lisa continued arranging her strawberries, but she kept one ear on the conversation. After a few minutes, Tom approached her, looking worried. "Lisa, I need your opinion on something," he said. "That man, Frank Morrison, he runs the hardware store down the street. He's concerned about the dry conditions we've been having. There hasn't been any significant rain in over 2 months, and he says the Forest Service is warning about fire danger." Lisa felt her hands grow still on the strawberries. The word fire always affected her like a physical blow, though she had learned over the years not to show it. "What's his concern?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "He wants to know if we've checked our store's fire safety equipment. He's going around to all the businesses in town, reminding everyone to be careful. Apparently, the fire danger level has been raised to extreme in our region." Lisa nodded slowly. "That's wise of him. Have you checked the store's fire extinguishers and exits recently?" "Last month," Tom said. "Everything was fine, but I'm thinking we should do another check just to be safe. What do you think?" "I think that's a very good idea," Lisa said firmly. "Fire safety is not something to take lightly, especially in dry conditions." Tom looked at her with slight surprise. Lisa was usually quiet and non-assertive about anything outside her direct responsibilities. But now there was an intensity in her voice, a certainty that made him pay attention. "You're right," he said. "I'll do a complete check this afternoon, and I'll make sure all the staff knows where the emergency exits are." After Tom walked away, Lisa returned to her strawberries, but her hands trembled slightly. She took a slow, deep breath, using the techniques she had learned years ago to manage her anxiety. Count to 4 breathing in, hold for 4, count to 4 breathing out. Repeat until calm. Fire. Even after 22 years, the word could make her heart race and her palms sweat. She had thought she was past the worst of it, had thought she had successfully buried that part of her life. But certain triggers could still bring it all rushing back. The heat, the smoke, the roar of flames, and most of all, the overwhelming sense of failure that had driven her from the life she once knew. "Miss Lisa, Are you okay? Sarah had appeared beside her, looking concerned. Lisa realized she had been standing frozen, a carton of strawberries clutched in her hands, staring at nothing. I'm fine, Lisa said quickly, forcing a smile. Just thinking about something. These strawberries are particularly beautiful, aren't they? Sarah examined them. They are. You always pick out the best ones. She paused, then added gently, if you ever need to talk about anything, you know I'm here, right? I know I'm young, but I'm a good listener. Good. Lisa felt a surge of affection for the young woman. Thank you, Sarah. That means a lot to me. For a moment, Lisa considered telling her something, anything, about her past. But the habit of silence was too strong, and the fear of what might happen if she opened that door was too great. So instead, she just smiled and returned to her work. The rest of the day passed without incident. As Lisa drove home that evening, she noticed the dry conditions Frank Morrison had mentioned. The grass along the roadside was brown and brittle. The trees, while still green, looked stressed from lack of water. The mountains in the distance, usually lush with vegetation, had patches of brown among the green. She had lived in California before coming to Hillridge. She knew what dry conditions meant in the summer. She knew how quickly things could change when the wind picked up and the heat intensified. But that was not her concern anymore. She had left that life behind. She was just Lisa Berman, produce specialist at Green Valley Market, not Lisa Berman, helicopter pilot with the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. That night, as she tried to read her book, her mind kept wandering. Memories she had kept carefully locked away began to surface, unbidden and unwelcome. She remembered her first day of helicopter flight training, 24 years old and determined to prove herself. She had always loved flying, had gotten her private pilot's license as a teenager, and the moment she saw a helicopter performing fire suppression, she knew what she wanted to do with her life. She remembered the exhilaration of her first solo flight, the incredible feeling of power and freedom as she lifted off the ground. She remembered her early years as a pilot, the pride she felt in her work, the satisfaction of being part of a team that saved lives and protected communities. She remembered her crewmates, Charlie, the crew chief who taught her everything about helicopter operations, Maria, another pilot who became her closest friend, Jeff, the spotter who had an uncanny ability to read fire behavior. They had been like family, bound together by the dangerous and vital work they did. And she remembered the day everything changed. Lisa closed her book and walked to her bedroom. She opened her closet and pushed aside the everyday clothes to reveal a cardboard box on the top shelf. She hesitated for a long moment, then pulled it down and carried it to her bed. Inside the box were the carefully preserved remnants of her old life. Her flight logs, documenting thousands of hours in the air. Her certificate of commendation from the fire service. Photographs of her standing beside helicopters, wearing her flight suit and helmet, smiling with confidence and pride. Letters from communities thanking her team for their heroic efforts. At the bottom of the box was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. She unfolded it carefully and read the headline she had read 1,000 times before. Fire crew injured in dramatic rescue. Questions raised about response time. Lisa closed her eyes, but she couldn't stop the memories from flooding back. It had been August, 22 years ago. She was 45 years old, an experienced pilot with over 20 years of flying under her belt. It was supposed to be a routine fire suppression operation. A wildfire had broken out in a remote area, and several crews had been deployed to contain it. But the fire had behaved unpredictably. Winds had shifted suddenly, driving the flames in an unexpected direction. A ground crew of 8 firefighters had been caught in a dangerous position, trapped on a hillside with fire approaching from multiple directions. Lisa had been in her helicopter, preparing to make a water drop on another section of the fire, when the call came through. Ground crew trapped. Need immediate evacuation. Lives at risk. She had responded immediately, abandoning her planned drop and heading for the coordinates. But the conditions were terrible. Heavy smoke reduced visibility to almost nothing. Winds buffeted her helicopter violently. The fire was creating its own weather patterns, making flying conditions extremely dangerous. She had tried to reach them. She had tried with everything she had. But the smoke was too thick, the winds too strong. She couldn't see the landing zone, couldn't safely get close enough to attempt a pickup. She had circled for 10 minutes, radio filled with increasingly desperate calls from the ground crew, while she frantically searched for a safe approach. Finally, another helicopter with better equipment for flying in zero visibility had arrived and managed to extract the crew. All 8 firefighters survived, but 3 of them had suffered serious burns and smoke inhalation. The investigation afterward had cleared her of any wrongdoing. The official report stated that the conditions had been beyond the safe operational limits for her helicopter type, and that she had made the correct decision not to attempt a landing that could have resulted in a crash. The report praised her professionalism and judgment, but Lisa couldn't accept that. Those 10 minutes while she circled helplessly, listening to the fear in the voices on the radio, knowing people were suffering while she failed to reach them, those 10 minutes had broken something inside her. She had developed severe post-traumatic stress. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. Every time she looked at her helicopter, she felt crushing panic. The thought of flying made her physically ill. She had nightmares every night, dreams where she watched people burn while she floated helplessly above them, unable to save them. She had tried therapy, tried medication, tried to push through it, but nothing worked. After 6 months of struggling, she had made the hardest decision of her life. She had turned in her flight license and resigned from the fire service. Her friends and colleagues had been supportive but confused. "You're one of the best pilots we have," Charlie had told her. "What happened wasn't your fault. Please don't do this." But Lisa couldn't explain. How could she tell them that every time she tried to fly, she felt like she was betraying those firefighters who had suffered because she couldn't reach them? How could she make them understand that she no longer trusted herself, that the confidence and skill that had once defined her had been replaced by fear and self-doubt? So she had left. She had left California, left everyone she knew, and had driven until she found Hillridge, a small, quiet town far from any fire service operations, far from anyone who knew her past. She had taken the job at Green Valley Market, found this little house, and had built a new life from nothing. For 22 years, she had succeeded in keeping her past buried. She never talked about it, never thought about it if she could help it. She had convinced herself that she was content with her quiet life, that she didn't miss flying, didn't miss the sense of purpose she had once felt. But now, with fire danger high and the town potentially at risk, she found herself thinking about things she had tried to forget. She found herself noticing the wind patterns, the humidity levels, the condition of the vegetation. Her old instincts were awakening, and it frightened her. Lisa carefully packed the box away and returned it to her closet. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past. She had worked too hard to build this new life to let old memories destroy her peace. But as she lay in bed that night, she couldn't quite push away the feeling that something was coming, something that would force her to confront the person she used to be. The next morning, Lisa noticed that Frank Morrison's warnings about fire danger were being taken seriously throughout town. As she drove to work, she saw that the fire station's electronic sign had been updated with a message. Extreme fire danger. No outdoor burning. Be prepared. At Green Valley Market, Tom had been busy. When Lisa arrived, She found that he had created emergency evacuation procedures and posted them in the break room. He had also checked all the fire safety equipment and made sure every employee knew the locations of fire extinguishers and emergency exits. "I know it might seem like overkill," Tom said as he explained the new procedures during the morning staff meeting. "But Frank got me thinking. We need to be prepared. If there's ever a fire in town, we need to know exactly what to do." Lisa listened carefully, mentally evaluating Tom's plans. They were good as far as they went, but there were gaps. Things that only someone with real fire experience would notice. She almost spoke up several times, but each time she stopped herself. Speaking up would require explaining how she knew these things, and she wasn't ready for that. The day was hot and dry. By noon, the temperature had climbed to 95 degrees, unusual for Hillridge even in summer. The air felt heavy and static, and there was an oddness to the light, a brassy quality that made everything look slightly unreal. Mrs. Patterson came in around lunchtime, looking worried. "Have you noticed how dry it is, Lisa?" she asked as she selected tomatoes. "In all my 73 years living here, I've never seen it this dry so early in the summer. My garden is suffering terribly, even with daily watering." "It is very dry," Lisa agreed. "Are you doing anything special to prepare for fire season?" Mrs. Patterson nodded. "My son came over yesterday and helped me clear all the brush away from my house. And I've packed an emergency bag with important documents just in case. The sheriff's department sent out a notice recommending everyone do the same." "That's very wise," Lisa said. She paused, then added, "Make sure you also have a list of the medications you take, copies of your prescriptions, and a recent photo of yourself in case you need to get help from emergency services." Mrs. Patterson looked at her with surprise. "Those are excellent suggestions, Lisa. I hadn't thought of that. You're very knowledgeable about emergency preparedness." Lisa felt a flush of anxiety. She had spoken without thinking, her old training surfacing automatically. I read a lot," she said lamely. "Articles about safety and such." As Mrs. Patterson walked away, Lisa silently berated herself. She needed to be more careful. She couldn't let her guard down, couldn't let anyone see hints of who she used to be. But throughout the day, she found it harder and harder to maintain her silence. When she overheard two customers discussing their evacuation plans, she noticed flaws in their thinking. When she saw Tom checking the store's water supply, she realized he had placed the emergency water in a location that would be inaccessible if fire approached from certain directions. By the end of the day, Lisa felt exhausted from the constant effort of holding back her knowledge and experience. As she drove home, she made a decision. She would prepare her own property for fire season, using all the expertise she possessed. But she would do it quietly, without drawing attention. That way, at least she would know she had done what she could to protect her home. Over the next several days, Lisa worked in her yard every evening. She cleared all dry brush and vegetation within 30 feet of her house. She removed branches that overhung her roof. She soaked her yard thoroughly and trimmed back anything that could serve as fuel for fire. She organized her important documents and packed an emergency bag. Ellen Foster watched from her porch with curiosity. "You're certainly being thorough, dear," she called out one evening. "Should I be doing the same?" Lisa straightened up from her work, wiping sweat from her forehead. "It wouldn't hurt," she said. "The fire danger is really high this year. Better to be over-prepared than under-prepared." "Would you help me?" Ellen asked. "My arthritis makes it hard for me to do that kind of work, and I don't want to bother my son. He's so busy with his own family." Lisa hesitated only a moment before agreeing. "Of course. I'll come over this weekend and help you." Word spread quickly in small towns. By the following week, several neighbors had asked for Lisa's help with their own fire preparation. She found herself spending her weekends helping people clear brush, move firewood away from houses, and organize emergency supplies. "You seem to really know what you're doing," said Robert Jenkins, a neighbor from 3 houses down, as Lisa helped him create a defensible space around his home. "Have you done this kind of work before?" "Just common sense," Lisa deflected, "and I've been reading up on it." But the truth was, her old skills and knowledge were flooding back with alarming intensity. Every day she found herself automatically assessing wind patterns, noting the position of the sun, calculating fire behavior based on topography and vegetation. It was as if the part of her brain that had been shut down for 22 years was waking up, whether she wanted it to or not. At work, she noticed the same thing happening. When a customer mentioned seeing smoke in the distance, just a controlled burn by the Forest Service, it turned out, Lisa's mind immediately began calculating wind direction, potential fire spread, and evacuation routes. When Tom worried about the store's safety, Lisa almost automatically began planning defensive strategies before catching herself. Sarah noticed the change in her. "Are you okay, Miss Lisa?" the young woman asked one afternoon. "You seem, I don't know, more alert somehow, like you're paying attention to things the rest of us aren't seeing." "I'm fine," Lisa said, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. "Just a little concerned about the fire danger, like everyone else." "You don't seem like everyone else," Sarah observed gently. "You seem like someone who actually knows what to look for. Like someone with experience." Lisa felt her heart race. She forced herself to breathe slowly and smile naturally. "I just pay attention to the news and do research," she said. "That's all." But Sarah's observation stayed with her. She was letting her guard down, allowing her expertise to show. She needed to be more careful, more controlled. The life she had built here depended on her remaining anonymous, just another person in a small town. 2 weeks after Frank Morrison's initial warning, the town held a community meeting about fire preparedness. It was held in the community center, and nearly everyone in Hill Ridge attended. Lisa debated whether to go. Large gatherings still made her anxious, but she felt obligated to show up. Besides, she was curious about what the town's emergency response plan looked like. The meeting was led by Sheriff Wayne Brennan, a competent man in his late 50s who had been with the Hill Ridge Sheriff's Department for over 30 years. He stood at the front of the room with a microphone, addressing the crowd of concerned citizens. "Thank you all for coming," Sheriff Brennan began. "I know there's been a lot of concern about fire danger this summer, and that's why we wanted to have this meeting, to make sure everyone has accurate information and knows what to do in case of emergency." He was joined by Chief Ronald Matthews from the Hill Ridge Volunteer Fire Department and Susan Park from the State Forest Service. Between the three of them, they outlined the town's emergency response capabilities, evacuation routes, and safety recommendations. The town's fire department was small, 12 volunteers with 2 engines and 1 tanker truck. In case of a major fire, they would need to call for support from larger departments in surrounding areas. The nearest major fire department was in Lakeside, about 45 minutes away. The evacuation routes were straightforward. Highway 47, the main road through town, would be the primary route, with several secondary roads as alternatives if needed. The town had established 2 evacuation centers, the high school and the civic center in Lakeside. After the formal presentation, Sheriff Brennan opened the floor for questions. Hands shot up immediately. "What if the fire moves too fast and we can't evacuate in time?" asked one worried mother. "Our goal is to give you as much advance warning as possible," Chief Matthews replied. "We have lookouts monitoring the forest areas around town constantly during high danger periods. If we see smoke or detect fire, you'll hear the emergency sirens immediately." "How long would we have to evacuate?" another person asked. "That depends on many factors," Susan Park answered. "Wind speed, fire intensity, terrain. In some cases, you might have hours. In worst-case scenarios, you might have as little as 30 minutes. That's why it's crucial to be prepared in advance. Have your emergency bags packed, know your route, and be ready to leave immediately if ordered. 30 minutes. If a fire moved fast enough to give only 30 minutes warning, evacuation would be chaotic and dangerous. She wanted to stand up and tell them that their plans weren't detailed enough, that they needed more specific protocols, that they should have contingency plans for every possible wind direction and fire behavior scenario. But she stayed silent, her knuckles white from the force of her grip. An elderly man near the front stood up. "What about people who can't drive? I have macular degeneration. I can't see well enough to drive anymore. How will people like me evacuate?" "We have a list of residents who might need assistance," Sheriff Brennan said. "We'll have deputies going door to door to help anyone who needs it. But it's also helpful if neighbors can look out for each other. If you have a neighbor who might need help evacuating, please make arrangements to assist them." The meeting continued for another hour, covering various scenarios and concerns. As it concluded, people gathered in small groups, discussing their plans and sharing worries. Lisa slipped out quietly, not wanting to engage in lengthy conversations. As she walked to her car, she heard someone call her name. She turned to find Sheriff Brennan approaching her, a friendly smile on his weathered face. "Lisa Berman, right?" he said. "From Green Valley Market?" "Yes, that's right," Lisa replied, wondering why the sheriff was singling her out. "I've heard from several of your neighbors that you've been helping them prepare their properties for fire season," Sheriff Brennan said. "That's really generous of you. Frank Morrison mentioned that the advice you gave him about creating defensive space around his hardware store was top-notch." Lisa felt her stomach tighten. I've been reading about it." This was exactly what Lisa had been afraid of. Questions about her past, attention drawn to her expertise. She forced herself to remain calm and gave her standard deflection. "I'm just careful about research. With the dry conditions, I wanted to make sure I knew what to do." "Well, you've done a great job helping the community," Sheriff Brennan said. "If you have any other suggestions for our emergency plans, please let me know. We can use all the expertise we can get." Lisa nodded and made her escape as quickly as she could without seeming rude. As she drove home, her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. She was getting too visible, drawing too much attention. She needed to pull back, to return to being invisible. But even as she thought this, she knew it was probably too late. People in Hillridge had started to see her as some kind of expert on fire safety, and that identity, once established in a small town, would be hard to shake. That night, as she lay in bed, Lisa faced a truth she had been avoiding for weeks. The fire season was here, and whether she wanted to or not, she was being pulled back into the world she had left behind. Her old knowledge, her old skills, her old instincts, they were all awakening, demanding to be used. And deep down, beneath the fear and anxiety, she felt something else stirring, something she hadn't felt in 22 years, a sense of purpose, a recognition that she had unique abilities that might be needed. She didn't know what to do with these feelings. She had spent more than 2 decades building walls around that part of herself, convincing herself that she was better off as simple, quiet Lisa who arranged vegetables and lived a peaceful life. The thought of tearing down those walls, of facing who she used to be and what she had lost, terrified her. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, she wouldn't have a choice. The heat intensified as July progressed. Day after day, the temperature climbed above 95 degrees. The grass in yards turned from brown to crispy yellow. Trees began to look stressed, their leaves drooping despite increased watering. The whole town felt tense, as if waiting for something to happen. Lisa continued her work at Green Valley Market, maintaining her routine and trying to blend into the background again. But she couldn't quite manage it. People kept asking her questions about fire safety, seeking her advice about their preparations. She tried to deflect, but her knowledge was too specific and too useful for people to ignore. "Lisa," Tom said one morning as they stood in the stockroom, "I've been thinking about the market's emergency water supply. You mentioned that I'd stored it in the wrong place. Where would you put it?" Lisa sighed inwardly, but answered, "The loading area where you have it now could be cut off if fire approaches from the east, which is the direction of the forest. You should store it in multiple locations, some in the loading area, some near the front entrance, and some in the basement if you have one. That way, no matter which direction danger comes from, you'll have access to water." The Tom nodded thoughtfully. "That makes a lot of sense. See, this is what I mean. You think about angles that never would have occurred to me. Are you sure you've never worked in emergency services or something like that?" "I'm sure," Lisa said firmly. "I just think carefully about problems." But Tom's question rattled her. She was revealing too much, being too helpful. She resolved again to pull back, to return to being less visible. That afternoon, as she was arranging a new shipment of corn, she noticed people gathering near the front of the store, looking out the windows. She walked over to see what was catching their attention. Smoke. A thin column of gray smoke rising in the distance, somewhere in the mountains to the northeast of town. "Do you think it's a fire?" one customer asked nervously. "Could be someone's campfire," another suggested, though his tone was doubtful. The way it rose, the color, the shape, these were the characteristics of an actual wildfire, probably still small, but definitely burning. Tom appeared at her side, also staring at the smoke. "That doesn't look good," he said quietly. "No," Lisa agreed. "It doesn't." Within an hour, the news spread through Hillridge. There was indeed a fire in the national forest northeast of town. The Forest Service had detected it and dispatched crews to contain it. Initial reports suggested it was about 5 acres and was being actively fought. Sheriff Brennan's voice came over the town's emergency broadcast system, calm and reassuring. "Attention Hillridge residents. We have confirmed that there is a wildfire burning in the national forest approximately 12 miles northeast of town. The Forest Service is responding with firefighting crews and aircraft. At this time, the fire poses no immediate threat to Hillridge. We will continue to monitor the situation and provide updates. There is no need to evacuate at this time. Please remain calm and stay tuned for further information." Despite the sheriff's assurance, anxiety rippled through the town. At Green Valley Market, customers gathered in small groups, discussing the fire and what it might mean. Sales of bottled water and canned goods increased noticeably. Lisa tried to focus on her work, but she found herself repeatedly drawn to the windows, watching the smoke column in the distance. Her old instincts were screaming at her, analyzing the smoke, calculating fire spread based on terrain and current weather conditions. The fire was northeast of town. The prevailing winds in this area during summer tended to blow from west to east, which would push the fire away from Hillridge. But if the winds shifted, or if the fire created its own weather patterns, things could change quickly. She noticed other details too. The smoke column was getting thicker as the afternoon progressed, suggesting the fire was growing despite the firefighting efforts. The color was changing from gray to darker shades, indicating hotter, more intense burning. These were not good signs. As her shift ended and she prepared to leave, Tom approached her again. "Lisa, can I ask you something?" "Of course. You've been watching that smoke all afternoon, and I've seen the way you look at it, like you're reading something from it that the rest of us can't see. What do you see when you look at that smoke?" Lisa hesitated. This was dangerous territory. But Tom's face was genuinely worried, and she felt obligated to be honest. I see a fire that's growing, she said quietly. The smoke is getting darker and thicker. That means it's burning hotter and more intensely. The crews fighting it are probably having a hard time getting it under control. Tom absorbed this information, his worry deepening. Should we be more concerned than the sheriff is telling us to be? I can't say, Lisa replied carefully. A lot depends on factors I don't know. How many firefighters are working on it, what equipment they have, what the terrain is like. But yes, if I were in charge of this town's safety, I would be watching that fire very closely and making sure all emergency plans were ready to activate immediately. After she left the market, Lisa didn't go straight home. Instead, she drove to a small park on the northern edge of town that offered an unobstructed view of the mountains. Several other people had had the same idea. About 20 residents stood in the park, staring at the smoke column in the distance. Lisa parked and got out of her car, joining the silent watchers. The smoke was clearly visible now, a dark column rising into the afternoon sky. Even from this distance, she could see that the fire had grown significantly since the morning. It was no longer 5 acres. It was bigger, much bigger. Getting worse, isn't it? Said a voice beside her. Lisa turned to see Frank Morrison, the hardware store owner who had first raised concerns about fire danger. He looked worried, but resigned, like someone who had seen trouble coming and wasn't surprised it had arrived. Yes, Lisa said simply. I've lived here for 35 years, Frank said, staring at the smoke. Never seen a fire this close to town. The Forest Service always caught them before they got this size. But this year, everything is so dry. The fire has plenty of fuel. Lisa nodded. She wanted to say more, wanted to offer some reassurance, but she couldn't bring herself to lie. The situation was concerning, and it could get much worse before it got better. As the sun began to set, the smoke column was illuminated from below by the fire's glow. It was a beautiful and terrible sight, orange and red light flickering through the gray smoke, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Lisa finally drove home, but instead of going inside, she stood in her front yard, watching the distant fire as darkness fell. The glow was clearly visible now, an orange stain on the dark horizon. Ellen Foster came out onto her porch. It's frightening, isn't it? She called over. Yes, Lisa agreed. It is. Do you think we'll be safe? Lisa wanted to say yes, wanted to provide comfort and certainty, but she had learned long ago that false reassurance could be dangerous. I think we need to be prepared, she said instead. Make sure you have your emergency bag packed and ready. And if you're told to evacuate, leave immediately. Don't wait. Ellen nodded, looking more frightened than before, but Lisa knew that fear was appropriate right now. Fear would keep people alert and ready to act if necessary. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the wind rustling through the trees outside her window, feeling the dry heat that persisted even after dark. She thought about the fire burning in the mountains, about the crews fighting it through the night, about the 1,000 variables that would determine whether it was contained or whether it grew into something catastrophic. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and got out of bed. She went to her computer and began researching the current fire. News reports were limited, but the Forest Service had posted updates on their website. The fire was now estimated at 300 acres and was only 10% contained. Crews were working around the clock, but challenging terrain and extreme fire behavior were hampering efforts. 300 acres. Lisa's stomach tightened. The fire had grown 60 times larger in just one day. That rate of growth suggested extremely dangerous conditions, hot, dry, and windy with plenty of fuel. She looked at the satellite images available on the Forest Service website. The fire was burning in heavily forested terrain with steep slopes and narrow valleys. These were the worst possible conditions for firefighting. Difficult to access, easy for fire to spread, dangerous for crews. She found herself pulling up topographical maps, studying the terrain between the fire's current location and Hillridge. The fire would have to burn through about 12 miles of forest to reach the town. There were natural fire breaks, a creek, a road, some areas of sparse vegetation that might slow it down. But if the winds were strong enough and the fire hot enough, natural fire breaks could be jumped. Lisa caught herself in the middle of calculating fire spread rates based on wind speed and stopped abruptly. What was she doing? This wasn't her job anymore. This wasn't her responsibility. She was just a grocery store employee, a quiet woman living a peaceful life in a small town. But even as she thought this, she knew it wasn't true. She might have left her old profession behind, but the knowledge and skills remained. And more importantly, the part of her that cared about keeping people safe hadn't gone away. It had just been sleeping. She turned off her computer and returned to bed. But before she closed her eyes, she made a decision. She would start paying very close attention to this fire. She would monitor every update, track every change in wind and weather, calculate every possible scenario. Not because she planned to do anything about it, but because she needed to know. After 22 years of deliberately not knowing, she needed to see what was coming. The next morning, Lisa woke early and immediately checked for updates on the fire. The Forest Service's overnight report was not encouraging. The fire had grown to 800 acres, still only 10% contained. Nighttime firefighting efforts had been hampered by dangerous conditions and poor visibility. At work that day, the fire was all anyone could talk about. Customers came into Green Valley Market not just to shop, but to share information and rumors. Some of the stories were accurate, based on official reports. Others were wild speculation, that the fire was actually 2,000 acres, that it was burning out of control, that evacuation orders would be issued within hours. Lisa found herself in the uncomfortable position of knowing more than most people. Her years of experience made it easy for her to separate fact from fiction, but she tried to keep quiet about it. She didn't want to set herself up as some kind of expert, but people noticed anyway. Lisa seems to have a good handle on what's really happening, she heard one customer say to another. She's not panicking like some people, but she's not dismissing it either. Sarah approached her mid-morning, looking scared. Miss Lisa, I'm really worried about my grandmother. She lives alone about 5 miles from town, even closer to the forest. Should I try to convince her to come stay with us in town? Lisa considered the question carefully. That would be wise, she said gently. Even if the fire doesn't reach her, it would be good for her to be somewhere she can evacuate from more easily if necessary. Will you come with me to talk to her? Sarah asked. She likes you, and she might listen to you. Lisa hesitated, then agreed. After work, she followed Sarah in her car to a small house on the outskirts of town. Sarah's grandmother, Mrs. Chen, was a sprightly woman in her 80s with sharp eyes and an independent spirit. I'm not leaving my home, Mrs. Chen said firmly when Sarah broached the subject. I've lived here for 40 years. Some fire in the mountains isn't going to chase me away. Lisa understood the sentiment, but she also understood the danger. She sat down with Mrs. Chen and spoke calmly and directly. Mrs. Chen, I understand that you don't want to leave your home, but the fire is serious. The conditions are very dry, and if the fire reaches this area, you would have very little time to evacuate. By coming to stay with Sarah in town, you're not abandoning your home. You're making sure you can return to it safely after the danger has passed. Mrs. Chen studied Lisa for a long moment. You speak like someone who knows about these things, she observed. Have you experienced fire before? Something in Lisa's tone must have convinced her. I've seen what fire can do, and I've seen what happens when people wait too long to get to safety. Please, for Sarah's sake, consider staying in town until we know the fire is under control. Mrs. Chen finally agreed to pack a bag and stay with Sarah temporarily. As they helped the elderly woman gather her things, Sarah squeezed Lisa's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't think she would have listened to anyone else. That evening, Sheriff Brennan issued an updated statement. The fire had now grown to 1,500 acres and was still only 15% contained. While there was no immediate threat to Hillridge, residents were advised to be prepared to evacuate on short notice. An evacuation warning, not an order, but a warning, was issued for several rural properties on the northeast outskirts of town. The next few days followed a grim pattern. Each morning, Lisa would check the fire reports and find that it had grown overnight. 1,500 acres became 2,500, then 4,000, then 6,000. The containment percentage remained stubbornly low. Weather forecasts added to the concern. A high-pressure system was bringing hot, dry conditions with gusty winds. These were exactly the conditions that could turn a dangerous fire into a catastrophic one. Lisa watched it all with growing dread. She recognized the pattern, had seen it before. The fire was establishing its own behavior, creating its own weather, growing stronger and more unpredictable with each passing day. The firefighters on the ground were doing everything they could, but they were fighting a losing battle against conditions that overwhelmed their resources. On the 5th day after the fire started, the wind direction changed. The wind, which had been blowing steadily from west to east, had shifted to blow from northeast to southwest. This meant the fire, which had been burning away from Hillridge, was now being pushed directly toward the town. She checked the Forest Service website and found her fears confirmed. The overnight wind shift had caused the fire to make a significant run to the southwest. It had jumped several containment lines and grown to over 10,000 acres. It was now approximately 8 miles from Hillridge. At work, Lisa found it nearly impossible to concentrate. She kept checking her phone for updates, watching the skies through the store windows, feeling the wind and noting its speed and consistency. Everything in her professional experience told her that the situation was becoming critical. Around noon, Sheriff Brennan issued another statement. The evacuation warning for rural properties was upgraded to a mandatory evacuation order. All residents in the designated areas were ordered to leave immediately. Additionally, the rest of Hillridge was placed under an evacuation warning, meaning residents should be prepared to leave at a moment's notice. The announcement sent shockwaves through the town. At Green Valley Market, customers began buying emergency supplies in earnest: water, batteries, canned food, first aid supplies, anything that might be needed for an emergency. Tom and the other staff worked frantically to keep shelves stocked and help customers find what they needed. Lisa worked mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She was calculating fire spread rates, considering topography, analyzing wind patterns. By her estimation, if the fire continued to grow at its current rate and the winds remained consistent, it could reach Hillridge's outskirts within 36 to 48 hours. That evening, the smoke that had been a distant column for the past few days became a visible presence over the town. The sky took on a hazy orange tint. The air smelled of smoke. Ash began to fall like gray snow, settling on cars and lawns. Lisa stood in her front yard, staring at the smoke-filled sky, and felt something breaking inside her. For 22 years, she had run from fire, from the trauma it represented, from the guilt and fear that haunted her. She had built walls around herself, convinced that she could live a life disconnected from the thing that had broken her. But now fire was coming to the town she had called home for more than 2 decades, threatening the people she had come to care about. and she alone had the knowledge and experience that might make a difference. She thought about Sarah and her grandmother. She thought about Tom and his family. She thought about Ellen Foster with her arthritis, about Mrs. Patterson and her careful tomato selections, about all the people in this small town who had accepted her without question, who had become her community even though she had kept them at arm's length. Could she stand by and do nothing? Could she watch while people she cared about faced danger, knowing that she had expertise that might save lives? But if she spoke up, if she revealed who she really was and what she knew, everything would change. The quiet life she had built would be over. The walls she had constructed would crumble. She would have to face the past she had spent 22 years trying to forget. Lisa stood there as the sky darkened and ash continued to fall, torn between two impossible choices. Stay silent and live with the guilt of inaction, or speak up and face the demons she had been running from for more than 2 decades. Finally, as night fell and the orange glow of the fire became visible on the horizon, she made her decision. Lisa barely slept that night. She spent hours at her computer, studying every piece of information she could find about the fire. She looked at satellite imagery, real-time weather data, topographical maps, and fire behavior models. Everything she saw confirmed her worst fears. The fire was growing exponentially. Overnight, it had ballooned to 17,000 acres. More critically, it was now only 6 miles from Hillridge's northern edge. At its current rate of spread, with the winds pushing it directly toward town, it could reach Hillridge by the following evening. But the official reports were still describing the situation as being monitored and maintaining that Hillridge was under evacuation warning, not evacuation order. But her experience told her that hope was misplaced. The fire was too big, too hot, moving too fast. At 6 in the morning, unable to wait any longer, Lisa drove to the sheriff's office. She found Sheriff Brennan already there, looking exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much either. "Lisa Berman," he said with surprise when she entered. "What brings you here so early?" "I need to talk to you about the fire," Lisa said. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. "Of course. Come into my office." Once they were seated, Sheriff Brennan looked at her expectantly. Lisa took a deep breath. This was it, the moment when she would have to reveal everything. There was no going back from this. "Sheriff, I haven't been completely honest with you," she began. "When you asked me if I had a background in fire safety, I said I didn't. That wasn't true." Sheriff Brennan's eyebrows rose, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. 22 years ago, I worked for the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. I was a helicopter pilot specializing in wildfire suppression. I did that job for 20 years before I left and came here. The sheriff absorbed this information, his expression shifting from surprise to understanding. "I see. That explains a lot. May I ask why you left?" Lisa's hands clenched in her lap. "There was an incident, a fire where I couldn't reach trapped firefighters in time. They survived, but some were injured. It wasn't officially my fault, but I couldn't continue after that. I developed PTSD and had to quit." "I'm sorry," Sheriff Brennan said gently. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was. I came to Hillridge to start over, to get away from everything related to fire. I never told anyone here about my past because I wanted to leave it behind." She looked directly at him. "But now there's a fire coming toward this town, and I can't stay silent anymore. Based on everything I've seen, Hillridge is in serious danger." Sheriff Brennan leaned forward. "Tell me what you think." For the next 30 minutes, Lisa explained everything she had observed. She described the fire's growth pattern, the weather conditions, the topography between the fire and the town. She calculated probable spread rates under different wind scenarios. She identified the most likely paths the fire would take and the areas of town that would be most vulnerable. The current evacuation warning isn't enough, she concluded. If the winds remain as strong as they're forecast to be, and if the fire continues to behave as aggressively as it has been, it could reach the northern edge of Hill Ridge by tomorrow evening. People need to evacuate now, while it's still relatively calm, rather than waiting until the last minute when roads are clogged and conditions are chaotic. Sheriff Brennan listened to all of this with growing concern. "That's a more serious assessment than what we're getting from the Forest Service," he said. "The Forest Service is doing their best, but they're dealing with multiple fires across the state. They're stretched thin, and they may be trying to avoid causing panic." Lisa's voice was firm. "Sheriff, I spent 20 years fighting wildfire. I've seen fires like this before. I know how they behave, how fast they can move, how little time communities can have when conditions turn bad. Hill Ridge needs to evacuate. If I issue a mandatory evacuation order based on your assessment and the fire doesn't reach town, I'll have unnecessarily disrupted thousands of lives," Sheriff Brennan said thoughtfully. "But if you're right and I don't issue the order—" He trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. "I understand the position you're in," Lisa said. "But I'm telling you, as someone who has more experience with wildfire than almost anyone in this region, the danger is real and immediate." The sheriff stood and walked to his window, staring out at the smoke-hazed morning. After a long silence, he turned back to Lisa. "I need to make some calls. Can you stay here?" For the next hour, Lisa waited in the sheriff's office while he spoke with the Forest Service, the state fire marshal, and the county emergency management director. She could hear his voice from the next room, explaining the situation, describing Lisa's credentials and assessment. Finally, he returned. "The Forest Service is standing by their current evaluation," he said. "They maintain that while the situation is serious, immediate evacuation isn't necessary. However," he paused, "I spoke with the fire marshal, who has reviewed the same data you looked at. He agrees that the fire's behavior is concerning and that your analysis is sound. He's recommending that we upgrade to a voluntary evacuation." "Voluntary won't be enough," Lisa said urgently. "Some people will stay, thinking they can protect their homes or that the danger isn't real. Then when the fire actually arrives, they'll be trapped. I can't order a mandatory evacuation without the state's approval, and I can't get that approval without more concrete evidence that the fire will definitely reach town." Sheriff Brennan looked frustrated. "I'm sorry, but my hands are tied." Lisa understood, but frustration and fear warred within her. She had finally broken her silence, finally shared her expertise, and it still wasn't enough. "What if I speak at a town meeting?" she asked. "Explain the situation directly to people? If they understand the real danger, maybe more of them will choose to evacuate voluntarily." Sheriff Brennan considered this. "We're holding an emergency community meeting tonight at 7 at the community center. You could speak there. But Lisa—" He hesitated. "Once you do this, everyone will know who you used to be. Your privacy will be gone." "I know," Lisa said quietly. She had already accepted this. The walls she had built around her past were coming down, whether she was ready or not. But if it helps keep people safe, it's worth it. Lisa spent the rest of the day preparing for the meeting. She created charts and diagrams showing the fire's progression. She rehearsed what she would say, trying to find the balance between being honest about the danger and not causing uncontrollable panic. At work that afternoon, she told Tom that she needed to leave early for the community meeting. "Of course," he said. "We're actually closing the store at 5 today anyway. Most people are preparing to evacuate or are at least getting ready in case we need to. Tom, Lisa said, I want you to know that I think you should evacuate tonight. Don't wait. Tom looked at her seriously. You really think it's that bad? Yes, I do. Then we'll leave, Tom said simply. My family trusts your judgment. Lisa felt overwhelmed with gratitude and responsibility. People trusted her. That trust could save lives, but it also meant that if she was wrong, she would be responsible for unnecessary disruption and fear. But she knew she wasn't wrong. Every instinct she possessed, every bit of experience and training, told her that Hillridge was in danger. The community center was packed when Lisa arrived that evening. It seemed like everyone in town had come to the meeting. Sheriff Brennan stood at the front with Chief Matthews and several other officials. When he saw Lisa, he waved her forward. Folks, thank you for coming, Sheriff Brennan began. I know there's a lot of anxiety about the fire, and we want to make sure you have the most accurate and up-to-date information. To help with that, I've asked Lisa Berman to speak with us tonight. A murmur went through the crowd. People knew Lisa as the quiet woman from the grocery store. Many were surprised to see her at the front of the room. Lisa stepped up to the microphone, her heart pounding. For 22 years, she had avoided this, being visible, being an authority, being the person who gave warnings about fire. But now there was no avoiding it. Good evening, she began, her voice stronger than she felt. Most of you know me as Lisa from Green Valley Market. But what you don't know is that before I came to Hillridge, I spent 20 years as a helicopter pilot fighting wildfires in California. I've seen dozens of major fires. I understand how they behave and how dangerous they can be. The murmuring increased. People were shocked, curious, confused about why she had kept this secret for so long. I'm telling you this now because the fire approaching Hillridge is serious. More serious than you might realize from the official reports. She pulled up her first chart, showing the fire's growth over the past week. This fire has grown from 5 acres to over 17,000 acres in less than a week. It's exhibiting extreme fire behavior, creating its own weather patterns, jumping containment lines, moving much faster than normal. She showed them the topographical map, tracing the fire's probable path toward town. The fire is currently 6 miles away. With the current wind speeds and the dry conditions, it could reach the northern edge of Hillridge by tomorrow evening, maybe sooner if conditions worsen. The room had gone silent. People stared at her charts, at her face, trying to understand what she was telling them. I know the current order is for voluntary evacuation, Lisa continued. But I'm here tonight to tell you, as someone with 20 years of experience fighting wildfire, that you should not wait. You should evacuate now, tonight if possible, tomorrow morning at the latest. Don't wait for a mandatory order. Don't stay to protect your homes. Material things can be replaced. Lives cannot. How do we know you're right? Called out someone from the audience. The Forest Service says we have more time. Lisa took a breath. The Forest Service is working with limited resources across multiple fires. They're doing their best, but they may not have the full picture of this specific situation. I've spent the last 24 hours studying nothing but this fire. I've analyzed every data point available, and everything I see tells me that time is running out. Why didn't you tell us before that you were an expert? Another person asked. There was suspicion in the voice. Because I was running from my past, Lisa said honestly. I had a traumatic experience in my last fire operation. I developed PTSD and left the profession. I came here to escape from everything related to fire. I never wanted to think about it or talk about it again. She paused, emotion thick in her throat. But I can't stay silent when I see danger coming to this community. You've all been kind to me over the years. Hillridge has been my home. I can't stand by and watch you face danger without at least trying to help." Mrs. Patterson stood up in the audience. "I believe her," she said firmly. "Lisa has always been honest and careful. If she says we need to evacuate, I'm evacuating." "So am I," said Tom. "Me too," added Sarah. One by one, voices throughout the audience echoed their agreement. Not everyone, some people remained skeptical or reluctant. But enough people trusted Lisa that the mood in the room shifted from uncertainty to determination. Sheriff Brennan took over the microphone. "Whether you choose to evacuate or stay, please make sure you're prepared. Have your emergency bags ready. Know your evacuation routes. If you have neighbors who might need help, check on them. And please, everyone, stay tuned to emergency broadcasts. If conditions change and we issue a mandatory evacuation order, you must leave immediately." The meeting concluded with people clustering together, making plans, sharing information. Lisa found herself surrounded by people thanking her, asking questions, expressing gratitude for her honesty. Sarah hugged her tightly. "Thank you for telling the truth," she whispered, "even though it must have been so hard." As the crowd dispersed, Ellen Foster approached Lisa. "Will you help me evacuate?" she asked. "I'm scared to drive alone in the dark with all the smoke." "Of course," Lisa said. "Let's go pack your things now. You can follow me to Lakeside." Over the next several hours, Lisa helped multiple neighbors prepare to leave. She made sure they had their emergency supplies, their important documents, their medications. She helped them decide what to take and what to leave behind. She calmed their fears and answered their questions. By midnight, most of the people she had personally helped were safely on the road to Lakeside or other evacuation centers. Lisa returned to her own house, exhausted but wired with adrenaline. She packed her own emergency bag, not that she had much to take. The box with her old flight logs and photographs, some clothes, important documents. She looked around her little house, the place that had been her sanctuary for 22 years, and wondered if she would ever see it again. As she was loading her car, her phone rang. It was Sheriff Brennan. "Lisa, I need you," he said without preamble. "The fire jumped a major containment line an hour ago. It's moving faster than anyone predicted. The Forest Service is now recommending mandatory evacuation, and the state has approved my request to issue the order. But we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "We need to evacuate the town in an organized way. We need to control traffic flow, make sure people take the safest routes, avoid bottlenecks. I've got my deputies, but none of us have experience managing a large-scale evacuation." "You do." Lisa's heart rate increased. "You want me to help coordinate the evacuation?" "Yes. I know it's asking a lot, especially given your past trauma. But you're the most qualified person we have. Will you help us?" Lisa stood in her driveway, looking at the orange glow that now lit up the northern sky. Somewhere in her mind, a voice screamed at her to say no, to get in her car and drive away, to not put herself back into the position of responsibility that had broken her 22 years ago. But a louder voice, one that had been silent for 2 decades, said yes. This was what she had trained for. This was what she knew how to do. And these were people she cared about. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said. Lisa arrived at the sheriff's office to find organized chaos. Deputies were manning phones, radios crackled with updates from various emergency services, and maps of Hill Ridge were spread across every available surface. Sheriff Brennan looked relieved when he saw her. "Thank God," he said. "Okay, here's the situation. The mandatory evacuation order goes out in 15 minutes. We're expecting most of the town's 3,000 residents to try to leave at once. Highway 47 is our main evacuation route, but if everyone tries to use it simultaneously, we'll have gridlock. What do we do?" Lisa moved to the largest map of the town and studied it carefully. Years of training and experience flooded back. She could see the problem immediately and the solution. "We need to divide the town into zones and stagger the evacuation," she said, her voice taking on a tone of authority she hadn't used in 22 years. "The areas closest to the fire leave first, but we use multiple routes to spread out the traffic." She began marking the map with a pen. "Zone 1 is the northern section, closest to the fire. They evacuate immediately via Highway 47 heading west. Zone 2 is the central section. They wait 30 minutes, then evacuate via both Highway 47 and County Road 12. Zone 3 is the southern section. They wait an hour, then use both routes plus Mountain View Road." "That makes sense," Sheriff Brennan said. "But how do we communicate this to everyone?" "Emergency broadcast, social media, and deputies going door to door in the northern section," Lisa replied. "The northern section is critical. We need to make sure everyone there leaves first because they're most at risk." Chief Matthews joined them, looking stressed. "We've got another problem. The hospital has 32 patients, including several who are in critical condition and can't be easily moved. We need to evacuate them, but it's going to take time." Lisa thought quickly. "How many ambulances do you have?" "3. And we can get maybe 2 more from neighboring towns, but that's it. Then we need to prioritize. Critical patients first, then stable patients can be transported in buses or large vehicles with medical personnel accompanying them. Do you have a list of every patient and their condition?" "I can get it," Chief Matthews said, already moving toward his phone. For the next hour, Lisa worked with Sheriff Brennan and his team to organize the evacuation in detail. She calculated how long it would take to move each zone of the town, identified potential bottlenecks, and created contingency plans for various scenarios. She assigned deputies to key intersections to direct traffic. She coordinated with the hospital to ensure the most vulnerable patients were evacuated first. At 1 o'clock in the morning, the official evacuation order was broadcast. "This is a mandatory evacuation order for the town of Hillridge. All residents must leave immediately. This is not a drill. The wildfire is approaching rapidly and presents an immediate danger to life and safety. Evacuate now." The words sent a chill through Lisa. She had heard similar announcements before, 22 years ago, in situations that had sometimes ended in tragedy. But this time, she was in a position to make a difference. This time, she had the opportunity to do it right. "Lisa, we need you in the field," Sheriff Brennan said. "I'm setting up a command post at the intersection of Highway 47 and Main Street. That's the main choke point for evacuation. I need you there to help manage traffic flow and make decisions on the ground." Lisa grabbed a radio and a reflective vest, then climbed into a sheriff's vehicle with Deputy Mark Harrison, a young man in his late 20s who looked both frightened and determined. As they drove through Hillridge, Lisa saw the town transforming before her eyes. Lights were on in every house. People were loading cars with frantic urgency. Children were being buckled into car seats. Pets were being loaded into carriers. And precious possessions were being stuffed into vehicles already full to bursting. The smoke had grown much thicker. It hung in the air like fog, reducing visibility and making everyone cough. Ash fell steadily, covering everything in gray powder. And the sky to the north glowed bright orange, the fire clearly visible now, a wall of flame that seemed to stretch across the entire horizon. At the intersection of Highway 47 and Main Street, Sheriff Brennan had set up a command post, a folding table with radios, maps, and flashlights. Several deputies were already there, directing the flow of traffic onto the highway. "Lisa, good," Sheriff Brennan said when she arrived. "We've got Zone 1 evacuating now. It's going relatively smoothly, but we're starting to see some congestion about 2 miles down the highway. Can you coordinate with the deputies there to keep things moving?" Lisa took control with the calm authority of someone who had commanded operations in far more chaotic conditions. She radioed the deputies at the congestion point, got a report on what was causing the backup, and issued instructions to route some traffic onto an alternate road that paralleled the highway. Over the next 3 hours, Lisa was in constant motion. She coordinated traffic flow, helped resolve problems as they arose, and made quick decisions to adapt to changing conditions. When a minor accident occurred on the highway, blocking one lane, she immediately redirected traffic and arranged for a tow truck. When an elderly couple broke down at the side of the road, she sent a deputy to help them and coordinate a ride. When a family with young children ran out of gas, she arranged for fuel to be brought to them. Throughout it all, she maintained radio contact with Sheriff Brennan and the other coordination points around town. She tracked which zones had evacuated, which areas still had residents, and where problems were emerging. "You're a natural at this," Deputy Harrison said at one point, watching her work. "It's like you were born to do this." "I was trained for it," Lisa corrected, "and I've done it before." But even as she focused on the immediate crisis, a part of her mind was constantly monitoring the fire. She could see it growing closer, could feel the heat increasing, could smell the smoke growing thicker and more acrid. Time was running out. Around 4 in the morning, Sheriff Brennan radioed with concerning news. "Lisa, we've got a problem. There are still approximately 200 residents in the northern section who haven't evacuated. Some of them are refusing to leave, saying they want to stay and defend their homes. Others are elderly or disabled and are having trouble getting out. We're running out of time." Lisa felt ice in her stomach. This was her worst nightmare. People in danger with time running out. But this time, she was prepared. This time, she had the resources and the authority to act. "I'm going in," she said. "Deputy Harrison and I will go door to door in the northern section and get those last people out." "Lisa, the fire is less than 2 miles away now," Sheriff Brennan warned. "If you go in there, you might not have time to get back out." "Then we'll have to work fast," Lisa said, "but I'm not leaving anyone behind." She and Deputy Harrison drove into the northern section of Hillridge. The streets were eerily empty now, with most residents already evacuated. But lights were still on in some houses, and cars remained in some driveways. They went door to door, knocking urgently, convincing people to leave. Most needed no convincing. Once they saw the fire's proximity, they grabbed their things and fled. But a few were stubborn. "I've lived in this house for 40 years, one elderly man said defiantly. "I'm not leaving it to burn." Lisa looked him directly in the eyes. "Sir, I understand your attachment to your home, but if you stay, you will die. That's not an exaggeration. The fire is moving too fast and burning too hot for you to defend against it. Please, for the sake of your family who loves you, leave now while you still can." Something in her voice, the absolute certainty, the hard-won experience, convinced him. He nodded and allowed Deputy Harrison to help him to his car. They continued working their way through the neighborhood. Lisa's training from 2 decades ago came flooding back. How to stay calm under pressure, how to quickly assess situations, how to prioritize when there wasn't enough time to save everything. They found a disabled woman who couldn't drive and whose family had somehow been separated from her during the evacuation. Lisa helped her into the deputy's vehicle. They found a family with 3 young children who had been so panicked they had gotten lost trying to find the evacuation route. Lisa gave them clear directions and sent them on their way. As they worked, the fire grew closer. The heat was becoming intense, even from a distance. The smoke was so thick that visibility was reduced to less than 100 feet. Embers began falling from the sky, starting spot fires in dry grass and vegetation. "Lisa, we need to leave!" Deputy Harrison shouted over the roar of approaching flames. "We're cutting it too close!" "5 more minutes," Lisa said. "Just 5 more minutes to check the last few houses." But even as she said it, She knew they were out of time. The fire was cresting the ridge north of town, a wall of flame 40 feet high, consuming everything in its path. The radiant heat was becoming unbearable. The smoke was making it hard to breathe, even with the bandanas they had wrapped around their faces. "Lisa, we have to go now!" Deputy Harrison grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the vehicle. Lisa took one last look around, desperately hoping she hadn't missed anyone, then ran for the car. They jumped in, and Deputy Harrison floored it, racing through the streets toward the main evacuation route. Behind them, the fire descended on the northern section of Hillridge like an angry god. Trees exploded into flames. Houses ignited with terrifying speed. The world behind them turned into an inferno. They made it to Highway 47 with less than a minute to spare. As they raced down the highway, Lisa looked back to see the northern section of Hillridge being consumed by fire. Her heart broke for all those homes, all those memories being destroyed. But then she thought about the people, all those residents who were safely evacuated, who would live to rebuild, who would survive because of the coordinated effort of the evacuation. She had done it. After 22 years of running from her past, of doubting herself, of believing she had failed, she had finally succeeded. She had saved lives. By the time Lisa and Deputy Harrison reached the command post, Sheriff Brennan had moved to the south end of town. Dawn was breaking over a drastically changed landscape. The northern third of Hillridge was gone, consumed by the fire. Smoke billowed into the sky in massive columns. The orange glow of flames was visible even in the growing daylight. But the fire wasn't stopping. It was pushing deeper into the town, advancing street by street, block by block. And between the flames and the remaining 2/3 of Hillridge were only a few exhausted firefighters and the natural barriers of roads and less dense vegetation. Sheriff Brennan looked haggard when Lisa approached him. "Everyone's out," he said with relief. "Thanks to your coordination and your personal efforts in the northern section, we got everyone evacuated safely. No casualties." "That's good," Lisa said, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the fire, analyzing its behavior, calculating its next moves. But the fire's still coming. It's going to keep pushing south. "I know. The fire crews are setting up defensive lines along Oak Street and Railroad Avenue, hoping to stop it there. But they're running out of resources. We've got maybe 20 firefighters and 2 engines trying to hold back a fire that's now over 40,000 acres." Lisa studied the map spread on the command post table. She could see what the firefighters were trying to do, and she could see why it wouldn't work. The defensive lines they had chosen were too close to dense residential areas. If the fire breached those lines, it would find abundant fuel in the form of houses and trees. "They're positioning themselves wrong," she said. She pointed to the map. "The fire is going to jump Oak Street easily. There's too much vegetation on both sides. They need to fall back to Pine Street instead. There's a park there that creates a natural fire break, and the street is wider. That's where they should make their stand." "Can you tell them that?" Sheriff Brennan asked. Lisa hesitated. She had revealed her expertise, had helped with the evacuation, but this was different. This was actually directing firefighting operations. That was a role she had sworn she would never take again. But as she watched the fire advancing, watched the exhausted crews working with insufficient resources to protect what was left of Hillridge, she realized she didn't have a choice. Not if she wanted to live with herself afterward. "Get me in contact with whoever's in charge of the firefighting operations," she said. 10 minutes later, Lisa was on a radio call with Chief Matthews and Captain Steve Rodriguez from the State Fire Service, who had arrived during the night to coordinate firefighting efforts. "This is Lisa Berman," she said. "I'm a former CAL FIRE helicopter pilot with 20 years of wildfire experience. I've been helping coordinate the evacuation, but I need to talk to you about your defensive positions." There was a pause. Then Captain Rodriguez's voice came through, skeptical and stressed. "With all due respect, ma'am, we're a little busy right now fighting a fire. Unless you have equipment or personnel to offer, I don't have time for consultations." "I understand that, Captain, but your current defensive lines aren't going to hold. The fire is exhibiting extreme behavior, and it's going to jump Oak Street. You need to reposition to Pine Street, where you'll have better natural fire breaks and a higher chance of success." Another pause. "How do you know this?" "Because I've seen this pattern before. I've fought fires like this. And I'm looking at your positioning right now and telling you it's not going to work. Please, trust me on this." "Captain Rodriguez," Sheriff Brennan cut in, "Lisa has been accurate about everything so far. She predicted the fire's movement when no one else did. I recommend you listen to her." A longer silence this time, filled with the sound of flames roaring and shouting voices in the background. Finally, "All right, we're already getting hammered here. Moving to Pine Street might give us a better chance. We'll reposition." Over the next hour, Lisa worked with Captain Rodriguez to coordinate the repositioning of fire crews. It was delicate work. They had to fall back without leaving the fire completely unchecked, had to move equipment and personnel while maintaining some defensive capability. Lisa found herself slipping back into the role she had abandoned 2 decades ago. She analyzed fire behavior, predicted the fire's next moves, identified the best positions for crews to defend. She coordinated water supply, suggested tactics for creating fire breaks, and helped prioritize which areas to defend and which to let burn. It felt strange and terrifying, and also strangely right. This was what she had trained to do. This was what she was good at. And after 22 years of denying that part of herself, it felt like coming home. By mid-morning, the new defensive lines were in place. Fire crews were positioned along Pine Street, using the park as a natural fire break and focusing their efforts on protecting the remaining residential areas of Hill Ridge. Additional resources were arriving from surrounding counties. More engines, more crews, even a helicopter for water drops. But the fire was relentless. It pushed against the defensive lines again and again, finding weak points, exploiting any gap in coverage. Houses on the northern side of Pine Street ignited despite efforts to save them. Spot fires started by wind-blown embers had to be quickly extinguished before they could spread. Lisa was everywhere, coordinating efforts, making quick decisions, directing resources where they were most needed. She worked with the helicopter pilot to identify the best locations for water drops. She helped crews prioritize which houses to defend. She predicted where the fire would make its next push and positioned personnel accordingly. "Lisa, we've got a problem," Captain Rodriguez radioed. "The fire is making a run on the eastern edge. It's going to get behind our lines and cut us off." Lisa grabbed her binoculars and looked east. Rodriguez was right. The fire was moving faster on the eastern flank, exploiting lighter winds and drier vegetation. If it got behind the defensive lines, the firefighters would be trapped. "Pull your eastern crews back now," Lisa ordered. "Fall back to Elm Street. It's wider and has less vegetation. You can defend there. If we pull back, the fire will take another 6 blocks of homes." "If you don't pull back, you'll lose your crews," Lisa said firmly. "Material things can be replaced. Lives cannot. Pull back now, Captain." She heard him giving the order, heard the crews responding, heard the controlled urgency in their voices as they withdrew. The fire immediately pushed into the space they had abandoned, consuming houses and trees with terrifying speed. But the crews made it out safely and established new positions at Elm Street. The battle continued throughout the day. Slowly, painfully, the firefighters began to gain the upper hand. The fire's advance slowed as it ran into areas with less fuel. Additional resources kept arriving, allowing crews to be rotated and rested. The wind began to die down as afternoon turned to evening. By nightfall, the fire was still burning, but it was no longer advancing. The defensive lines were holding. Hillridge had lost approximately 40% of its structures, but 60% had been saved. And most importantly, because of the well-coordinated evacuation, no lives had been lost. Lisa stood at the command post, exhausted beyond anything she had experienced in decades. Her throat was raw from smoke inhalation. Her eyes burned. Her body ached. But as she looked at the maps showing which parts of town had been saved, she felt something she hadn't felt in 22 years. Peace. She had faced fire again. She had faced her worst nightmare. And this time, she had succeeded. This time, everyone had gotten out safely. This time, she had made the right decisions at the right moments. Sheriff Brennan approached her, looking equally exhausted but deeply grateful. "Lisa, I don't know how to thank you. Without your help, we would have lost the entire town, maybe lives too." "I just did what I was trained to do," Lisa said quietly. "You did more than that," the sheriff insisted. "You overcame your own trauma to help us. That takes incredible courage." Lisa looked at the fire still burning in the distance, now mostly contained, no longer the terrifying monster it had been that morning. "I couldn't let it happen again," she said softly. "I couldn't fail to help when I had the ability to make a difference." The fire burned for 3 more days before being fully contained. By the time it was over, it had consumed over 50,000 acres and destroyed more than 400 homes in Hillridge and the surrounding area. But because of the successful evacuation, not a single life was lost. In the days after the fire, Hillridge began the long process of recovery. Residents were allowed to return to assess damage. Some found their homes intact. Others found nothing but ashes and memories. Lisa's house had survived. It was on the southern edge of town, away from the worst of the fire's path. When she walked through her door for the first time after the evacuation, everything was exactly as she had left it. But she was not the same person who had left. The news media descended on Hillridge, wanting to tell the story of the town that had successfully evacuated with no casualties. And at the center of every story was Lisa Berman, the quiet grocery store employee who had revealed herself to be an experienced fire expert and had helped coordinate the town's response. Lisa found herself uncomfortable with the attention. Reporters wanted interviews. People wanted to thank her. The mayor wanted to give her a commendation. It was everything she had avoided for 22 years. But she also realized that she couldn't hide anymore. Her secret was out. Everyone in Hillridge now knew who she really was and what she had done, both in her previous career and during the fire. A week after the fire was contained, there was another community meeting. This time, the purpose was to discuss rebuilding efforts and to recognize those who had helped during the crisis. Lisa attended reluctantly, sitting in the back row, hoping to remain relatively invisible. But when her name was called, the entire room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and cheering, some were crying. Reluctantly, Lisa made her way to the front of the room. Mayor Patricia Wilson, an energetic woman in her 60s, greeted her warmly. "Lisa Berman," the mayor began, "you came to our town 22 years ago seeking peace and privacy. You worked quietly among us, never seeking attention or recognition. But when disaster threatened, you stepped forward. You shared your expertise, coordinated our evacuation, and helped save what remained of our town. On behalf of everyone in Hillridge, thank you." The mayor presented her with a commendation and a key to the city. Lisa accepted them with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. When asked if she wanted to say anything, Lisa stepped to the microphone. She looked out at all the familiar faces: Tom and Sarah from the market, Mrs. Patterson with her careful eye for tomatoes, Ellen Foster from next door, Frank Morrison, who had first raised the fire warning, and hundreds of others she had served and worked alongside for more than 2 decades. "I came to Hillridge because I was broken," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "I had failed in a critical moment, or at least I believed I had. I developed PTSD and convinced myself that I was no longer capable of doing the work I had trained for. So I ran. I hid. I built walls around my past and tried to pretend that part of my life had never existed." She paused, collecting herself. "But when the fire threatened this community, I couldn't stay hidden. You all welcomed me into your lives even though you knew nothing about my past. You trusted me, befriended me, made me part of your community. When I saw you in danger, I had to try to help. I had to face the thing I had been running from. What I learned during those terrifying hours is that the failure I had been carrying for 22 years wasn't as defining as I thought it was. Yes, I had a traumatic experience. Yes, I wasn't able to help everyone I wanted to help in that moment. But that didn't mean I was a failure. It meant I was human, facing impossible circumstances." She looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as she could. "This community gave me the opportunity to find out that I could still help, that my skills and experience still had value. You helped me heal without even knowing I needed healing, so I should be thanking you." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. People applauded again, longer and louder this time. After the meeting, Lisa was surrounded by people wanting to talk to her. Sarah hugged her tightly. "You're a hero," the young woman said. "You've always been a hero. Now you just let us see it." Mrs. Patterson took her hand gently. "I always knew there was something special about you, dear. The way you cared about every single tomato. I knew that kind of attention to detail came from somewhere deeper." Tom clapped her on the shoulder. "You have a job at Green Valley Market for as long as you want it. But I have a feeling you might be considering other opportunities." He was right. Over the next weeks, Lisa was approached by several organizations. The State Fire Service wanted to hire her as a consultant for evacuation planning. The County Emergency Management Department offered her a position coordinating disaster preparedness. A private company specializing in wildfire risk assessment wanted to bring her on as an expert analyst. Lisa considered all the offers carefully. For 22 years, she had avoided anything connected to fire. But the experiences during the Hillridge fire had shown her that she could face her fears, that her trauma didn't have to control her life. She ultimately accepted a position as an emergency preparedness coordinator for the county. It would allow her to use her expertise to help communities prepare for disasters without requiring her to be in the field during actual fire operations. It was a compromise between her past and her present, a way to contribute without completely returning to the world that had broken her. But she kept her house in Hillridge and continued to work part-time at Green Valley Market. The town was her home now, truly and completely. These people weren't just neighbors anymore. They were family. 6 months after the fire, Hillridge was rebuilding. New homes were being constructed on lots where old ones had burned. The community had come together in remarkable ways, supporting those who had lost everything, organizing fundraisers, donating time and labor to help with reconstruction. The northern section of town, which had been completely destroyed, was being rebuilt with new fire-resistant building codes and better defensive space planning. Lisa had worked with the town council to develop these standards, applying everything she had learned over her career to help make Hillridge safer for the future. On a Saturday morning in December, Lisa was working in her garden when a car pulled up in front of her house. She didn't recognize the vehicle or the man who stepped out, a fit man in his 50s with graying hair and a kind face. "Can I help you?" Lisa asked, standing and dusting off her gardening gloves. "Are you Lisa Berman?" the man asked. I am. My name is Michael Torres, he said, extending his hand. I was one of the firefighters who was trapped in that fire 22 years ago, the one where you were flying the helicopter. Lisa felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She stared at him, unable to speak. I heard about what happened here in Hillridge, Michael continued. How you came out of retirement to help coordinate the evacuation, how you saved the town. I wanted to meet you and tell you something. Lisa found her voice. I couldn't reach you, she said, the old guilt rushing back. I tried, but the conditions. I failed you. You didn't fail anyone, Michael said firmly. Lisa, I've been a firefighter for 30 years now. I've been in countless dangerous situations. What happened that day wasn't your fault. The conditions were impossible. You made the right choice not to attempt a landing that would have resulted in a crash. If you had tried, you probably would have died, and we still wouldn't have gotten out any faster. But you were burned. 3 of you were seriously injured. And all 8 of us survived, Michael said. We all recovered. We all went back to work and continued our careers. We never blamed you. We understood what you were up against that day. Tears were streaming down Lisa's face now. I blamed myself, she whispered. I spent 22 years thinking I had failed you. I know, Michael said gently. One of your former colleagues tracked me down after hearing about Hillridge. They told me about your PTSD, about how you left the service, about how you'd been living in hiding all these years. I had to come and tell you the truth. You were a damn good pilot, and what happened that day wasn't a failure. It was you making the best decision possible in an impossible situation. He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. This is my family. My wife of 28 years, my 3 kids, my 2 grandchildren. I got to have this life because you and the other pilot got us out of there alive. Maybe not as fast as we would have liked, but alive. That's what matters. Lisa couldn't stop crying. All the guilt, all the shame, all the self-blame she had carried for 22 years was crashing over her like a wave. But Michael's words were like a lifeline, pulling her through it. The other guys from that day, we've stayed in touch, Michael continued. When I told them I was coming to see you, they all wanted me to give you a message. They're grateful for what you did that day. They never held it against you, and they're proud of what you did here in Hillridge. He handed her a photograph. It showed 8 men in firefighting gear, taken recently based on their ages. They were all smiling, holding a banner that read, "Thank you, Lisa Berman. You saved our town and you saved us. We're proud to know you." Lisa held the photograph with shaking hands, sobbing openly now. She had spent more than 2 decades convinced that these men must hate her, must blame her for their injuries. The reality, that they understood, that they had never blamed her, that they were grateful, was almost too much to process. Sarah, who had been visiting, came out onto the porch to see what was happening. She immediately understood that this was a significant moment and quietly stood by, offering her presence as support. I spent so long running, Lisa said when she could speak again. I was so sure I had failed that I couldn't face it anymore. That's the thing about trauma, Michael said. It distorts our perception. It makes us believe things that aren't true. You weren't a failure, Lisa. You were a professional doing an incredibly difficult job under impossible circumstances. And then you were a person dealing with trauma in the best way you could. I wish I had known this 22 years ago, Lisa said. Maybe you weren't ready to hear it then, Michael replied. But you're hearing it now. And more importantly, you've proven to yourself what you're capable of. You faced your fears, you used your expertise to save lives, and you're building a new life that incorporates your past instead of running from it. They talked for over an hour, Michael sharing stories about his career, about the other men from that day, about how the firefighting profession had evolved over the decades. Lisa shared her story too, how she had come to Hillridge, how she had built her quiet life, and how the fire had forced her to confront everything she had been avoiding. Before he left, Michael gave her one more piece of advice. Don't waste any more time feeling guilty about something that wasn't your fault. You're 67 years old. You've got a lot of living left to do. Use your experience and knowledge to help people. That's the best way to honor what you learned from that day. After Michael drove away, Lisa stood in her front yard, holding the photograph of the 8 firefighters. Sarah came and stood beside her. "Are you okay, Miss Lisa?" the young woman asked gently. "I think I am," Lisa said, and realized it was true. For 22 years, she had been carrying a burden that wasn't hers to carry. Now, finally, she was setting it down. 2 years after the Hillridge fire, Lisa stood at a podium in front of 300 emergency management professionals attending a state conference on disaster preparedness. At 69 years old, she had become a respected voice in the field of wildfire evacuation planning and community resilience. The key to successful evacuation, she was saying, is not just having plans in place. It's having people in place who understand how to implement those plans under pressure. It's about communication, coordination, and having the courage to make difficult decisions quickly. She clicked to the next slide, which showed before and after pictures of Hillridge. This town lost 40% of its structures, but 0 lives. After her presentation, she was surrounded by people asking questions, requesting consultations for their own communities, wanting to learn from her experience. Lisa handled it all with grace, still somewhat surprised that at this stage of her life, she had found a new career helping others prepare for the kind of disasters she had once fought on the front lines. That evening, back in Hillridge, she returned to her small yellow house on Maple Street. But it wasn't quite as small anymore. She had added a home office where she could work on her consulting projects and write the training materials she was developing for emergency managers across the state. Ellen Foster waved from her porch as Lisa pulled into her driveway. "How was the conference, dear?" "It went well," Lisa called back. "How are your new roses doing?" "Beautifully." "You were right about the placement. They get just the right amount of sun." Lisa smiled. Some things hadn't changed. She still lived in the same house, still maintained her garden, still worked part-time at Green Valley Market arranging vegetables for discerning customers like Mrs. Patterson. But everything else had transformed. The walls she had built around her past were gone. Everyone in Hillridge knew her story now, and instead of the judgment or pity she had feared, they had responded with respect and gratitude. She was no longer hiding who she was or what she had experienced. She had reconnected with some of her old colleagues from Cal Fire. Maria, her pilot friend from decades ago, had visited Hillridge, and they had spent hours talking about old times. Charlie, the crew chief who had taught her so much, sent her regular emails filled with encouragement and pride in what she was accomplishing. Most importantly, she had forgiven herself. The conversation with Michael Torres had been the beginning of that healing, but it had taken time and work. She had gone back to therapy, processing the trauma she had been carrying for so long. She had learned to separate what was her responsibility from what was simply the result of difficult circumstances beyond anyone's control. As she entered her house and changed out of her professional clothes into comfortable home attire, she paused by the bookshelf in her living room. The box that had been hidden in her closet for 22 years now sat openly on display. Her flight logs, her photographs, her commendations, she had framed some of them and displayed them proudly. They were part of her history, part of who she was. Next to them were new photographs, pictures from Hillridge's rebuilding ceremonies. A photo of her with Sheriff Brennan and Chief Matthews receiving the state's Medal of Valor for her actions during the fire. A picture of her with the town council, consulting on the new building codes. And her favorite, a photo of her with Sarah, Tom, Ellen, Mrs. Patterson, and dozens of other Hillridge residents, all smiling, all alive, all safe. Her phone rang. It was the county emergency management director. "Lisa, we've got a situation developing in the eastern part of the county. Another wildfire. Nothing major yet, but they want someone with experience to come assess the threat and help coordinate response if needed. Are you available?" Lisa felt a small flutter of old anxiety, but it was manageable now. She had learned that fear was normal, that having anxiety about dangerous situations was appropriate and even healthy. What mattered was not letting that fear control her or prevent her from using her abilities to help others. "Yes," she said, "I'm available. I'll be there in an hour." As she gathered her equipment and prepared to leave, she thought about how far she had come. From a young woman eager to fight fire from the sky, to a traumatized pilot who ran from everything related to fire, to a quiet grocery store employee hiding from her past, to finally a confident professional using her experience and expertise to help communities stay safe. The journey had been long and difficult. There had been times when she thought she would never recover from her trauma, never be able to face fire again, never be able to forgive herself for what she perceived as her failure. But life had given her a second chance. Hillridge had given her a second chance. The fire that threatened her adopted home had forced her to confront her fears and discover that she was stronger than she thought. The people who trusted her, who believed in her, who accepted her for who she was, they had given her the courage to reclaim the parts of herself she had lost. As she drove toward the new fire incident, Lisa Berman, former helicopter pilot, grocery store employee, wildfire evacuation expert, and community hero, felt something she had not felt in 22 years. She felt whole. The small-town woman who arranged vegetables with care and precision, who had hidden her expertise for decades out of fear and trauma, had finally accepted that she could be both people at once. She could be quiet and unassuming while also being capable and skilled. She could appreciate peace and simplicity while also being ready to serve when needed. The fire that had once broken her had ultimately healed her. And the community that had known her only as Lisa from the market had helped her rediscover that she was, and had always been, a hero, even when she couldn't see it herself. As she drove through the darkening evening toward whatever new challenge awaited, Lisa smiled. At 69 years old, she had finally learned the most important lesson of all. It's never too late to face your fears, never too late to heal, and never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. The hero from the sky had returned to Earth, planted roots in a small town, and discovered that true heroism wasn't about flying helicopters or fighting dramatic battles. It was about showing up, using your gifts to help others, and having the courage to be your authentic self, all of yourself, including the parts that scared you. And in the quiet moments between crises, when she was back in Hillridge arranging tomatoes for Mrs. Patterson, or tending her garden, or sharing coffee with Ellen Foster, Lisa knew that she had found what she had been searching for all along. Not escape from her past, but integration of it. Not forgetting who she had been, but accepting all the versions of herself, the pilot, the traumatized survivor, the quiet store employee, the community coordinator, the expert consultant, and simply Lisa, a woman who had lived long enough to learn that our struggles don't define us, but how we choose to face them does. The mountains in the distance stood eternal and unchanged, as they had for millions of years. They had seen countless fires, countless seasons, countless human stories play out in their shadows. They would see countless more. But tonight, they bore witness to one story in particular, The story of Lisa Berman, who at 67 had found the courage to stop running, to face her past, and to save her community. Who had learned that the greatest heroism often comes not from never falling, but from finding the strength to rise again. As she turned onto the highway and headed toward whatever the night would bring, Lisa knew with certainty that she was finally, completely, and truly home, not just in Hillridge, but in herself. And that was the greatest victory of all. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.